Chapter 7. Confrontation and Revelation. Golden Creek Ranch came into view as the stagecoach crested the final hill, and Martha's heart constricted at the sight. In just 2 months, the property had developed the unmistakable air of neglect that follows when hope begins to abandon a place. Broken fence posts tilted at dispirited angles, uncut hay bent beneath its own weight in fields that should have been harvested weeks ago. The barn roof, which had needed minor repairs during Martha's stay, now sported a gaping hole near the western edge. "Place has seen better days," Hank remarked as he guided the team down the rutted drive. "Shame what's happening to the Hargrove spread." Martha could only nod, her throat too tight for speech. The deterioration spoke more eloquently than words about Catherine's struggles since her departure. "Want me to wait?" Hank asked as the coach rolled to a stop before the main house. The porch steps sagged noticeably, their paint peeling like a sunburn. "No," Martha replied, gathering her courage along with her satchel. "I'm not certain how long this will take, or if she'd be allowed to stay at all." Hank helped her down, studying her face with unexpected gentleness. "Good luck, Miss Wilson. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." The stagecoach departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Martha alone with her thundering heart and the weight of her evidence. She forced herself up the creaking steps and across the porch that had once hosted their evening conversations. Her knuckles had barely grazed the door when it swung open. Catherine Hargrove stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from irritation to shock in the space of a heartbeat. She wore a simple work dress, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair escaping its hasty braid. Fatigue had carved shadows beneath her eyes, and a new tightness bracketed her mouth. For an excruciating moment, neither woman spoke. "You," Catherine finally managed, the single syllable containing multitudes. Martha drew a steadying breath. "Please don't close the door. I have information about Frank Thomas and the bank manager. They're conspiring to steal your ranch. There's silver on your northern property. They're planning to force a sale before you discover it." The words tumbled out in an urgent stream, Martha's pulse pounding in her temples as she watched Catherine's face. Would she even be believed after everything that had happened? Catherine's eyes narrowed. "Silver? That's preposterous." Despite her dismissive words, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features. "How convenient that you've conjured this tale, just as our situation grows desperate." "It's not a tale." Martha reached for her satchel. "I have evidence, financial records, overheard conversations, connections I've pieced together. Please, Catherine, 5 minutes of your time is all I ask. You've taken far more than minutes from me already." Catherine's voice held the brittle edge of someone who'd had to become harder than they ever wished to be. She glanced over her shoulder into the house, conflict evident in her expression. "How is your father?" Martha asked softly. Something in Catherine's composure fractured slightly. "Dying," she answered with brutal simplicity. "The doctor says days, not weeks." "I'm so sorry, truly." Catherine studied her, searching for insincerity and finding none. With visible reluctance, she stepped aside. 5 minutes, then you leave, regardless of what fantastical conspiracy you've invented." The interior of the house felt different. The warmth that had characterized it during Martha's stay had diminished. Furniture gathered dust in corners, and the air carried the distinctive heaviness of a home where cleaning had become a luxury rather than routine. The changes made Martha's chest ache with regret. Catherine led the way to Josiah's study, which appeared largely untouched since Martha's time there. The ledgers remained on the shelves where she'd organized them, though a thin layer of dust suggested they hadn't been consulted recently. "Your evidence," Catherine prompted, maintaining a careful distance as she positioned herself behind the desk. Martha opened her satchel, withdrawing the neatly bundled papers she'd prepared. "When I was working with the ranch accounts, I discovered discrepancies in Frank's reporting. Cattle losses, equipment purchases, water management issues. At the time, I thought he might be embezzling funds." "I remember your accusations," Catherine replied coolly. "They weren't just accusations." Martha spread the copied ledger entries across the desk. "Look here. Every reported cattle loss over the past year occurred in the north pasture. The drought conditions Frank claimed affected only that section, yet rainfall has been consistent across the property." Catherine reluctantly examined the papers. This could simply reflect poor management. Perhaps, except for this, Martha pointed to a map she'd sketched. The affected area forms a perfect rectangle around the ridge bordering Henderson Land. Now, in Cheyenne yesterday, I overheard two businessmen discussing a significant silver deposit discovered on Golden Creek Ranch, specifically in that exact location. Catherine's expression remained skeptical, but she didn't interrupt. Frank found the silver while supposedly searching for strays, but instead of telling you, he took samples directly to Carlton at the bank. They brought in Continental Mining Company, who confirmed the deposit's value. They're preparing purchase documents for your father to sign this week, offering a fraction of the property's true worth. Martha pulled out another document. These are my notes from the conversation. The men mentioned specific details about the deal's structure, Frank's commission as finder, and Carlton's percentage as broker. They're exploiting your father's condition and your financial distress to steal land worth 20 times their offer. Catherine's practiced indifference began showing cracks. She examined the documentation with increasing attention, her analytical mind engaging despite her personal feelings. This is circumstantial. You've made connections that suggest wrongdoing but prove nothing. You're right, Martha acknowledged. That's why I came in person rather than sending a letter. You need to stop any sale until the northern section can be properly assessed for mineral rights. Catherine looked up, conflict evident in her expression. Why should I believe you? After everything? The question hung between them, weighted with their shared past, because despite my inexcusable deception about my identity, I never lied about caring for Golden Creek, or its people. Martha met Catherine's gaze steadily. I have nothing to gain by coming here. My position in Cheyenne is secure. This visit risks my reputation, possibly even legal consequences. Why would I do that except to prevent a grave injustice? Before Catherine could respond, the study door swung open with unnecessary force. Frank Thomas filled the doorway, his expression darkening as he recognized Martha. What is she doing here? He demanded, storming into the room. His gaze fell on the papers spread across the desk, and his complexion shifted alarmingly. What lies is this imposter spreading now? Catherine straightened, something in Frank's reaction clearly piquing her suspicion. Miss Wilson has brought some concerning information about the northern pasture. Apparently there's silver there that you neglected to mention. Frank's laugh sounded forced, even to Martha's untrained ear. Silver? On grazing land? That's absurd. This woman is clearly desperate to regain your trust through outlandish claims. Then you haven't had the northern ridge assessed by Continental Mining? Martha asked, watching his face carefully. The slightest hesitation preceded his denial. Of course not. This is just another of her manipulations. Interesting, Martha remarked, lifting a paper from the desk, because I have notes from a conversation between two Continental Mining executives discussing their assessment of a significant silver deposit on Golden Creek land. They specifically mentioned you by name as the one who brought the samples to Mr. Carlton. Frank's hand shot out with surprising speed, snatching the paper from Martha's grasp. More fabrications. You've developed quite a talent for forgery. Those aren't forgeries, Catherine said, her voice acquiring a dangerous edge. Those are her handwritten notes. Why are you so agitated, Frank? I'm protecting your interests as I've always done. Frank began gathering the papers, crumpling them in his large hands. This woman nearly destroyed your family once. I won't stand by while she attempts it again with these slanderous accusations. Martha moved to protect her evidence, but Frank shoved her aside with enough force to send her stumbling against the bookshelf. Several volumes tumbled to the floor as she fought to maintain her balance. Frank! Catherine exclaimed, shock evident in her tone. That's quite enough. You don't understand what's at stake, he growled, continuing to collect and destroy Martha's carefully prepared documentation. She's trying to delay the sale to Continental. They're offering fair market value for struggling ranch land. It's the only way to salvage something from this failing operation. Fair market value, Martha challenged, recovering her footing. Or 1/20th of the property's worth once the silver deposit is factored in. Silver deposit? Frank scoffed, though sweat had begun beading on his forehead. There's no proof of any such thing. Then why is Continental Mining so eager to acquire specifically the northern section? Martha countered. Why have you systematically devalued that exact area through manipulated reports and diverted water resources? Why did you meet twice with Carlton and Continental representatives in Cheyenne last month? Frank froze momentarily. How could you possibly know about those meetings? The slip hung in the air between them, his expression changing as he realized his error. Catherine stepped forward, her face hardening into something Martha had never seen before, the protective fury of a woman defending her birthright. So there were meetings, Catherine said softly, dangerously. Catherine, listen to me. Your father is dying. The ranch is failing. I arranged an opportunity that benefits everyone. Continental gets mining rights. You receive enough money to start fresh elsewhere, and I earn a modest finder's fee for my years of loyal service. Loyal service? Catherine repeated incredulously. You've been systematically undermining our operation while planning to profit from our loss. Business, Frank corrected, his tone patronizing. Something women rarely understand. This property has greater value as a mine than a struggling ranch. I simply facilitated its highest and best use. Without informing its actual owners, Martha interjected. Frank rounded on her. You have no place in this discussion, Miss Wilson. Your deception cost you any right to an opinion on Golden Creek affairs. At least my deception didn't involve stealing from people who trusted me, Martha retorted. How much is your modest finder's fee, Frank? 10%? 20? 30% of the mineral rights, a weak voice declared from the doorway. All three turned to find Josiah Hargrove seated in a wheeled chair, his frail body seeming barely substantial enough to support his nightshirt. Despite his physical deterioration, his eyes burned with clarity and unmistakable anger. Pa! Catherine rushed to his side. You shouldn't be out of bed. Josiah waved off her concern, his gaze fixed on Frank. I heard everything. Been sitting in the hallway since I recognized that voice. He nodded toward Martha. Figured if she had the guts to show her face here again, it must be important. Frank's expression cycled rapidly through shock, calculation, and forced contrition. Josiah, you misunderstood. I was protecting your interests. By selling my family's legacy for a third of its value? Josiah wheezed, each word clearly costing him precious energy. The agreement on Carlton's desk gives Continental the entire property for $12,000, with you receiving 30% of mining profits in perpetuity. Martha and Catherine exchanged startled glances. How do you know what's on Carlton's desk? Frank demanded. A ghost of Josiah's former smile appeared. Carlton's clerk is sweet on Mrs. Perkins' niece. Amazing what young men will share when trying to impress a pretty girl. His breathing grew labored, but he pressed on. Been suspicious of you for months, Frank. Couldn't prove anything until now. I think you should leave, Catherine told Frank, her voice brittle with barely contained fury, immediately. Frank looked between them, clearly calculating his options. His gaze settled on the papers still clutched in his fist. This changes nothing. Continental's offer expires tomorrow. Without it, the bank will foreclose within the month. He tossed the crumpled documents onto the floor. You need me more than I need you. I'd rather lose Golden Creek entirely than see you profit from its theft, Catherine declared. Something ugly flashed across Frank's features. Then that's exactly what will happen. Carlton won't extend your loans without my recommendation. He turned toward the door, then paused, looking back at Martha with undisguised contempt. Enjoy your hollow victory, Miss Wilson. You've saved them from one fate only to deliver them to another. The front door slammed moments later, rattling the windows throughout the house. In the study, silence stretched between the three remaining occupants, broken only by Josiah's labored breathing. I need to get back to bed, he finally said, his brief surge of energy clearly fading. Catherine, help me, then return to finish this discussion. There are decisions to be made. Catherine wheeled her father from the room, leaving Martha alone with the scattered remnants of her evidence. She knelt to gather the crumpled papers, smoothing them as best she could against the desk surface. The confrontation had unfolded differently than she'd anticipated. Josiah's unexpected appearance, Frank's rapid exposure, yet the core problem remained unsolved. Without Frank's support, the bank would likely foreclose. Even with proof of the silver deposit, establishing mining operations required capital the Hargroves didn't possess. Martha's revelation had stopped an immediate theft, but offered no pathway to salvation. Catherine returned several minutes later, her expression unreadable as she closed the study door behind her, She surveyed Martha and the restored papers with guarded eyes. "Papa's resting," she said, approaching the desk. "He wants to speak with both of us after supper. Apparently, he has ideas." Martha nodded, uncertain of her standing now that the immediate crisis had passed. "I should apologize for arriving unannounced. I didn't know how else to ensure you received this information before the sale proceeded." "Why did you come yourself?" Catherine asked abruptly. "You could have sent a telegram or letter once you discovered the conspiracy." "Would you have believed either?" Martha countered. "Or even read them, seeing my name?" Catherine didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. She picked up one of the restored documents, examining Martha's notations. "How did you figure all this out from Cheyenne?" "I kept copies of my work here," Martha admitted. "When I overheard those businessmen discussing Frank's deal, I realized the discrepancies I'd found weren't random. They formed a pattern around the northern section, precisely where the silver was discovered." "You continued investigating Golden Creek affairs even after leaving?" Catherine's tone suggested she wasn't sure whether to be impressed or disturbed by this persistence. "Not actively," Martha clarified. "But I couldn't forget the irregularities. They nagged at me like a mathematical equation with missing variables." She hesitated, then added softly, "And I worried about you and your father." Catherine's expression flickered with something unidentifiable, perhaps surprise at this admission or disbelief. "You left teaching to come here?" "I left a note explaining a family emergency." Martha managed a small, self-deprecating smile. "Technically not untrue, since Golden Creek was the closest thing to family I'd known since Matthew died." The admission hung between them, too honest for Catherine to dismiss, yet too painful to acknowledge. She returned the paper to the desk, maintaining the physical and emotional distance she'd established since Martha's arrival. "Frank was right about one thing," Catherine finally said. "Exposing his scheme doesn't solve our immediate problem. The bank loan comes due at month's end, and without an extension..." She didn't complete the sentence. "Perhaps Continental would negotiate directly with you now that Frank's involvement is eliminated," Martha suggested. "A fair price for mineral rights while you retain the ranch operations." "Perhaps," Catherine sounded unconvinced. "Though I doubt Carlton would facilitate such an arrangement given his apparent involvement in the original scheme." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 5, its familiar sound triggering memories of evenings spent in this very room, working side by side with shared purpose. Martha found herself wondering if such ease between them could ever be recovered, or if her deception had permanently severed that possibility. "I should check on Pa," Catherine said, clearly uncomfortable with the extended proximity. "Mrs. Perkins will show you to the guest room if you intend to stay overnight." The invitation, however reluctantly extended, suggested Martha wasn't being immediately banished. She accepted this small mercy with appropriate gratitude. "Thank you. I'd like to speak with your father if he's feeling strong enough later." Catherine paused at the doorway, finally meeting Martha's eyes directly. "Why did you really come back? The whole truth this time?" Martha considered deflection, a safer answer focused solely on the conspiracy, but discarded the impulse. If any hope existed for rebuilding trust between them, it required complete honesty now. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of you losing something you love through someone else's deception," she answered simply, "even if that meant facing your justifiable anger toward me." Catherine absorbed this, her expression giving away nothing. "We'll speak after supper," she said finally, and departed, leaving Martha alone with the weight of truths revealed and others still concealed in her heart. Sheriff Miller arrived with remarkable promptness given the ranch's distance from town, his weathered face betraying no surprise at finding Martha Wilson back in Golden Creek. If anything, his expression suggested he'd half expected to see her again, though whether for good or ill remained unclear. "Miss Hargrove," he greeted Catherine with a respectful tilt of his hat before acknowledging the others. "Miss Wilson. Mr. Hargrove." Josiah had insisted on remaining present despite Catherine's concerns, his frail body propped in the wheeled chair with pillows. Though physically diminished, the sharp intelligence in his eyes remained undimmed. "Sheriff," Josiah nodded. "Appreciate you coming out so quick." Sounded urgent. The lawman's gaze settled on the crumpled papers Martha had reassembled on the desk. Your note mentioned evidence of fraud? Frank Thomas has been systematically devaluing our property while conspiring with Carlton at the bank to sell it to Continental Mining Company for a fraction of its worth, Catherine explained, her tone clipped with controlled fury. They discovered silver on our northern ridge and kept it from us. Sheriff Miller's eyebrows rose. That's a serious accusation against men of standing in this community. I have documentation supporting the financial manipulation, Martha offered, indicating her papers. And Mr. Hargrove overheard Frank admit to the scheme directly. Not just admit it, Josiah wheezed. Boasted about his 30% cut of the mining profits. The sheriff's expression remained neutral as he reviewed the evidence, though his posture gradually stiffened, the only visible sign of his growing concern. This is troubling. Where is Thomas now? He stormed out about an hour ago, Catherine replied. Likely headed to town to warn Carlton. Too late for that. Sheriff Miller handed the papers back to Martha. Carlton cleaned out the bank safe yesterday afternoon and boarded the eastbound train. Telegraph from Cheyenne confirms he never arrived there. The news landed like a physical blow. Catherine gripped the edge of the desk for support. The bank safe? That held most of the deposits from local businesses, the church building fund, and our... She couldn't finish the sentence. Your ranch account, the sheriff completed quietly. I'm afraid so, Ms. Hargrove. Martha watched the color drain from Catherine's face. How much was in the ranch account? The quarterly cattle sale proceeds, Catherine answered, her voice hollow. Enough to make our loan payment and cover operating expenses through winter. The implications settled heavily in the room. Even with Frank's conspiracy exposed, the ranch had been effectively robbed of its operating capital. The immediate crisis remained unsolved, perhaps even worsened. I'll find Thomas, Sheriff Miller promised, returning his attention to the matter at hand. Based on what I've seen and heard, there's enough to hold him while we investigate further. He glanced toward Martha. Miss Wilson, I'll need a formal statement from you about how you came by this information. Of course, she agreed. The sheriff departed to coordinate a search for Frank, leaving the three of them in weighted silence. Josiah's breathing had grown more labored, concerning Catherine enough that she insisted on returning him to bed despite his protests. You've done enough for today, Pa, she said, her gentle tone brooking no argument. Martha will still be here when you've rested. Martha remained in the study, examining the financial documents more closely now that the immediate confrontation had passed. The ranch's situation appeared even more precarious than she'd initially realized. Without the cattle sale proceeds, they couldn't meet the loan payment due in less than 2 weeks. Even if they could somehow prove Carlton's theft, the legal proceedings would take months, time the ranch didn't have. Catherine returned 20 minutes later, fatigue evident in every line of her body. She sank into the chair behind the desk, looking momentarily lost amid her father's papers. How bad is it? Martha asked quietly. Bad? Catherine ran a hand across her forehead, a gesture Martha remembered from their late-night accounting sessions. The loan payment is $340. Without the cattle proceeds, she shrugged, the small movement conveying volumes about her exhaustion. Even if we sold every non-essential item on the property, we'd fall short. Martha calculated quickly. Her teaching salary had been modest, but living in the schoolroom had allowed her to save nearly every penny. How much could you raise through immediate sales? Perhaps $200, but that would leave us nothing for winter supplies or wages. Catherine sighed. The sensible choice would be to sell now, while we still have some negotiating leverage. To Continental? Martha asked, aghast. They're still the most likely buyers, even without Frank and Carlton's involvement. Martha shook her head. There has to be another solution. A commotion outside interrupted their discussion. Through the study window, they watched Sheriff Miller and his deputy escort a handcuffed Frank Thomas toward town. The foreman's face was thunderous, his posture rigid with indignation even in defeat. At least that's one problem resolved, Catherine observed without satisfaction. Martha hesitated only briefly before making her decision. I have $152 saved from teaching. It's yours. Catherine's head snapped up, genuine shock replacing her carefully maintained composure. What? My savings, Martha repeated. Combined with what you can raise, it should cover the loan payment. I insist you take it. I can't possibly accept. You can and you will, Martha replied firmly. Consider it partial restitution for the harm my deception caused. Catherine studied her with bewilderment. You must realize this money won't save the ranch long term. It merely postpones the inevitable. It buys time. Time to properly assess the silver deposit and negotiate with legitimate mining interests from a position of strength rather than desperation. Martha leaned forward earnestly. Full payment buys you 3 months before the next is due. Why would you do this? Catherine asked, her voice suddenly small. After how we parted, how this town treated you? Martha considered several possible answers before settling on the simplest truth. Because Golden Creek matters to you. And despite everything that happened, you matter to me. The stark honesty hung between them, neither an apology nor a plea for forgiveness, simply an unvarnished fact laid bare. Catherine looked away first, her composure finally beginning to fracture under the weight of the day's revelations. I should check on Pa, she said, rising abruptly. Supper will be ready soon. Martha watched her leave, recognizing the retreat for what it was. Not rejection, but self-preservation. Some emotions were too raw to examine in the harsh light of immediate crisis. The house settled into evening quiet, its familiar creaks and sighs as soothing to Martha as they were bittersweet. After supper, a simple affair during which conversation remained safely focused on practical matters, Josiah had requested privacy to rest. Catherine had disappeared to the barn for evening chores, despite Martha's offer of assistance. Martha sat alone on the porch swing, watching stars emerge in the deepening twilight. The vastness of the Wyoming sky still took her breath away. Boston's crowded buildings and smoky atmosphere had never permitted such an unobstructed view of eternity. The squeak of the screen door announced Catherine's return. She stood uncertainly in the doorway, as though debating whether to join Martha or retreat inside. Finally, she stepped onto the porch, settling not on the swing but in a nearby rocking chair, close enough for conversation, distant enough to maintain emotional boundaries. Papa's asleep, she offered, breaking the silence. His color is better than this morning. That's good news, Martha replied, genuinely relieved. Despite the ranch's troubles, Josiah's recovery remained the most critical concern. Silence stretched between them again, punctuated by the rhythmic creak of Catherine's chair. Martha resisted the urge to fill it with unnecessary chatter, recognizing that some distances required patience to cross. I feel like I've been running on a sinking ship, desperately trying to plug leaks while more keep appearing, Catherine finally said, her voice barely audible above the evening insects. Every day brings a new crisis. Pa's health, missing cattle, broken equipment, hands quitting for the mines. I've been so focused on staying afloat that I never questioned why we were taking on water in the first place. You couldn't have known Frank was deliberately sabotaging the ranch, Martha offered. I should have seen it. Catherine's rocker stopped abruptly. I grew up learning every aspect of ranching from Pa. How did I miss something so fundamental? What else have I failed to notice? The self-recrimination in her voice tugged at Martha's heart. You've been carrying an impossible burden alone. No one can maintain perfect vigilance under such circumstances. I wasn't alone, though, not for a while. Catherine's gaze finally lifted to meet Martha's directly. When you were here for the first time since Pa fell ill, I felt like someone was genuinely sharing the load. The admission clearly cost her, pride warring with honesty in her expression. I meant what I said earlier, Martha responded carefully. While my identity was false, my desire to help the ranch, to help you, was entirely genuine. Catherine studied her, moonlight silvering her profile. How much of Matthew was really you? The question cut to the heart of what had remained unspoken between them. Martha considered her answer carefully, recognizing its importance. More than I initially intended, she admitted. Matthew began as a complete fabrication, a desperate solution to an impossible situation. But the longer I stayed, the more difficult it became to maintain the distinction between the character I'd created and my true self. Which parts were real? Catherine asked, her voice stripped of defenses. My appreciation for the ranch, my concern for your father, my respect for your capabilities. Martha paused, gathering courage. My feelings for you? Catherine's sharp intake of breath was audible in the night's stillness. That's not possible. Why not? Because I believed I was growing close to a man who might become my husband, Catherine pointed out, a hint of renewed anger coloring her words. Whatever you felt couldn't possibly resemble that. No, Martha agreed. It couldn't and didn't. But the person who admired your strength while recognizing your vulnerability, who valued your intelligence and shared your dreams for Golden Creek, that person was real, Catherine. That was me, not Matthew. The admission hung between them, too honest to dismiss, yet too complicated to immediately accept. Catherine rose abruptly, moving to the porch railing, where she stood with her back to Martha, silhouetted against the star-filled sky. I've been so angry, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. Not just because of the deception, but because I missed him. The conversations, the shared work, the feeling that someone finally saw me completely. Her shoulders trembled slightly. How can I miss someone who never existed? Martha approached slowly, giving Catherine ample opportunity to retreat if desired. When she reached the railing, she stood beside Catherine rather than behind her, maintaining a respectful distance while offering companionship. Matthew didn't exist, she agreed softly. But the connection between us did. That wasn't imaginary, Catherine. What was it then? Catherine turned, her expression vulnerable in a way Martha had rarely seen. What possible name could we give to whatever grew between us? Friendship, at the very least, Martha offered. A recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps. Two people who understood each other beyond conventional boundaries. Catherine didn't immediately respond, her gaze returning to the distant mountains, barely visible against the night sky. I don't know how to reconcile who I thought you were with who you actually are. I'm not asking you to, Martha assured her, only to believe that my concern for Golden Creek and its people is genuine, regardless of how it began. The confession cost her. Every instinct urged Martha to press further, to seek forgiveness or understanding for feelings she herself didn't fully comprehend. But such requests would serve her needs rather than Catherine's. Another form of selfishness she refused to indulge. It's late, Catherine finally said, visibly exhausted by the emotional terrain they'd traversed. We should both rest. Tomorrow brings practical challenges requiring clear heads. Martha recognized the temporary retreat from difficult emotions. Not rejection, merely postponement. Of course. Good night, Catherine. As Martha turned toward the door, Catherine's voice stopped her. Martha... She paused, the sound of her actual name on Catherine's lips, unfamiliar yet deeply affecting. Yes? Thank you for coming back, for the warning about Frank, for... Catherine seemed to search for words before settling on. For seeing what needed to be seen, even when it wasn't convenient or comfortable. The simple acknowledgement felt more meaningful than effusive gratitude would have. Martha nodded, not trusting her voice with a response that wouldn't reveal too much too soon. Inside, as she prepared for bed in the same guest room she'd once occupied as Matthew, Martha allowed herself cautious hope. The chasm between them remained significant, trust broken was not easily mended, but a fragile bridge had begun to form across the divide. Whether it would bear the weight of future complications remained uncertain, but for tonight, the first tentative step had been taken. Not toward the romantic fantasy Martha had briefly indulged during her previous stay, but toward something potentially more valuable. Honest connection between their true selves, whatever form that might ultimately take. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. Martha Wilson squinted against the morning sun as she guided her borrowed mare along the familiar path to Golden Creek Ranch. The weathered sign at the entrance, once tilting precariously, now stood proudly upright, a small but significant symbol of the ranch's revival. We're just here for a meeting, Penny, Martha whispered to the horse, patting its chestnut neck. A perfectly normal, completely professional meeting about bank arrangements. The horse nickered as if to say, Who are you trying to convince? Martha straightened her new emerald green riding habit, an extravagance purchased with her first earnings as Cheyenne's schoolteacher. For weeks, she'd limited her visits to the ranch to necessary business matters, staying at Mrs. Finch's boarding house in town. Every interaction with Catherine had been cordial but carefully restrained. like actors following an unwritten script. As Martha crested the final hill, Golden Creek Ranch spread before her in the April sunshine. The transformation after just 1 month was remarkable. The broken fence posts had been replaced, fresh white paint gleamed on the barn, and ranch hands moved with purpose across the property. In the nearest pasture, cattle grazed on grass that had been properly irrigated for the first time in years. Most notably, smoke curled cheerfully from the chimney of the main house, a sight that had been uncertain during Josiah's worst days. "Miss Wilson?" Young Timothy, one of the new stable hands, called out as she approached. "Miss Hargrove said to expect you. Would you like me to take care of your mare?" "Thank you, Timothy," Martha replied, dismounting with considerably more grace than during her Matthew days. She still winced, remembering her first catastrophic attempt to mount a horse, which had ended with her sprawled in a water trough while Frank Thomas snickered. As Timothy led Penny away, Martha adjusted her hat and gathered her portfolio of documents. The leather case contained meticulously organized papers that had consumed her evenings for weeks, proof of the banker's malfeasance, restructured loan agreements, and a comprehensive 5-year plan for the ranch's finances. "Just the facts," she murmured to herself, a mantra repeated throughout sleepless nights when thoughts of Catherine proved far more distracting than ledger entries. Martha had barely reached the porch steps when the front door swung open. Catherine Hargrove stood framed in the doorway, sunlight catching the copper highlights in her chestnut hair. She wore a practical blue dress with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, likely interrupted in the midst of some household task. "You're early," Catherine said, her expression unreadable. Martha glanced at her pocket watch. "Am I? I thought we said 10 o'clock. "We did," Catherine's mouth twitched. "You're usually precisely 3 minutes late to everything." Martha felt warmth creep into her cheeks. Catherine had noticed such a detail about her. Well, I thought punctuality might be appreciated for a business meeting." "Is that what this is?" Catherine asked softly, then seemed to catch herself. She stepped aside, gesturing Martha in. "Father's waiting in the study. He's having one of his good days." The familiar scent of beeswax polish and cinnamon welcomed Martha as she crossed the threshold. The hallway, once dim due to economizing on lamp oil, now shone with polished wood and framed family photographs. "You've made changes," Martha observed, nodding toward a new arrangement of furniture. "Several," Catherine replied cryptically as she led the way. The study door stood ajar, and Martha could hear Josiah's voice, stronger than she'd ever known it, dictating a letter to someone. As they entered, she saw the once frail man sitting upright at his desk, color in his cheeks and firmness in his gestures. A young man, perhaps 16, sat opposite, awkwardly taking notes. "And tell those fellows at the Cattlemen's Association that Josiah Hargrove isn't dead yet, not by a long mile." He looked up, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile. "Ah, there she is, the financial wizard herself." The young secretary looked relieved at the interruption and scurried from the room when Josiah waved him away. "My apologies for the dramatic correspondence," Josiah said, his eyes twinkling. "But when a man comes back from death's doorstep, he's entitled to a bit of theater, wouldn't you agree, Miss Wilson?" Martha couldn't help smiling. "I wouldn't know, Mr. Hargrove, having never been at death's door myself." "And let's keep it that way," Catherine interjected, helping her father move from the desk to the more comfortable arrangement of chairs near the fireplace. Once they were settled, Martha opened her portfolio. "I've finalized the arrangements with the new bank in Laramie. They've agreed to our terms, including the reduced interest rate and extended payment schedule. They've also frozen Mr. Phillips' accounts pending the investigation." She handed Josiah the documents with signatures in all the right places. Josiah examined the papers, nodding appreciatively. "Remarkable. And to think we nearly lost everything to those swindlers." He looked up, his expression sobering. "We owe you a debt that can't be measured in dollars and cents, Miss Wilson." Martha shifted uncomfortably. "You owe me nothing, Mr. Hargrove. If anything, I'm still atoning for my deception." "Nonsense," Josiah declared, slapping the arm of his chair. "That business is behind us. What matters now is the future of Golden Creek." Catherine, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, moved to pour 3 cups of coffee from the pot warming on the small stove in the corner. "And what a future it could be." She handed Martha a cup, their fingers brushing momentarily. "The southeastern pasture is already showing improvement with proper irrigation. The cattle are healthier than they've been in years." And the new hands? Martha asked, taking a sip of coffee to steady herself. Good men, Josiah confirmed. Not like that snake Thomas. These fellows respect Catherine's knowledge. They may raise an eyebrow at taking orders from a woman, but they follow them. Martha smiled, remembering how Catherine had once demonstrated the proper way to herd cattle by outperforming every man on the ranch. They'd be fools not to. A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, recently repaired after years of stillness. Martha realized this was the moment to conclude the meeting, to thank them for their time and return to town. Yet something held her in place. Josiah cleared his throat. Which brings me to a proposition I've been considering. He set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Golden Creek Ranch is at a crossroads. We have the opportunity to become something extraordinary, but it will require the right partnership. Martha glanced at Catherine, whose face revealed nothing but intense focus on her father's words. The ranch needs someone with financial acumen, Josiah continued, gesturing toward Martha's portfolio, someone who understands ledgers and markets and banking relationships. But it also needs someone who knows cattle and horses and land, who can feel a change in the weather before it arrives. He nodded toward his daughter. Father, Catherine began, a warning in her voice. Josiah held up his hand. Let me finish, Kitty. He turned his full attention to Martha. Miss Wilson, I'm offering you a position as Golden Creek's official bookkeeper and business manager, with appropriate compensation and private living quarters in the East Wing, which we're renovating regardless. Martha's heart skipped several beats. She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. The arrangement would be entirely professional, Josiah continued smoothly. You would manage our financial affairs while continuing your teaching if you wish. We would benefit from your expertise, and you would have security and a respected position in the community. His eyes twinkled. Besides, I've grown rather fond of your no-nonsense approach to business matters. Martha looked toward Catherine, searching for any hint of her thoughts. This is unexpected, Mr. Hargrove. The best opportunities usually are, Josiah replied. Of course, such an arrangement would require complete honesty moving forward. No more secrets. His gaze, suddenly penetrating, moved between the two women. About anything. Catherine's cheeks flushed a delicate pink. Father, I hardly think... I'm not as oblivious as you both might believe, Josiah interrupted gently. I've lived long enough to recognize when two people share a unique understanding. Martha nearly dropped her coffee cup. Was he implying what she thought? She stared at the floral pattern on the carpet, certain her face must be crimson. Now then, Josiah announced abruptly. I believe I require a rest before lunch. Catherine, perhaps you might show Miss Wilson the improvements to the East Wing while I nap? Without waiting for a response, he rose with surprising agility and departed, closing the study door firmly behind him. The silence that followed seemed to vibrate with unspoken words. Martha carefully set down her cup, afraid her trembling hands might betray her. Your father is quite direct, she finally managed. Catherine released a short laugh that sounded almost like a sob. He's been that way since his recovery. Says facing death made him impatient with pretense. She stood and moved to the window, her back to Martha. You don't have to accept his offer. I know you've established yourself in town. Martha rose slowly, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain Catherine must hear it. And if I wanted to accept? Catherine turned, her expression vulnerable in a way Martha had rarely witnessed. Then I would say the East Wing receives wonderful morning light, perfect for someone who enjoys reading before breakfast. Martha took a hesitant step forward. I've always been an early riser. I know, Catherine whispered. You were always awake before everyone else, even as Matthew. A smile ghosted across her lips. I used to watch you from my window, walking in the garden, talking to yourself as you practiced lowering your voice. Martha groaned, covering her face. I was dreadful at pretending to be a man. Yes, Catherine agreed, her smile broadening. Particularly when you tried to chop wood. Poor Timothy still mentions Mr. Wilson's technique as a lesson in what not to do. They both laughed, and something tight in Martha's chest began to unravel. This was the first genuine moment of lightness between them since the revelation at the Founders' Day dance. "Would you like to see the East Wing?" Catherine asked softly when their laughter subsided. Martha nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They walked side by side through the house, their skirts occasionally brushing in a whisper of fabric against fabric. Catherine pointed out repairs and improvements. A strengthened banister, new curtains, a repaired floorboard that had always creaked. The East Wing, which had primarily served as storage during Martha's previous stay, was unrecognizable. Sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows into a sitting room with newly upholstered furniture. A small writing desk faced the window overlooking the garden, and bookshelves lined one wall. "It's lovely," Martha breathed, running her fingertips along the polished desk. "There's a bedroom through there," Catherine gestured toward a door, "and a small private washroom. We've had proper plumbing installed." There was a hint of pride in her voice. "Father insisted on modern conveniences for the renovation." Catherine looked away, her fingers fidgeting with a button on her sleeve. "3 weeks ago, before your father made his offer," Martha noted carefully. "Yes." Catherine met her gaze directly now, challenge and vulnerability mingled in her expression. "I may have suggested the idea to him." Martha's breath caught. "Why?" Catherine stepped closer, close enough that Martha could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "Because, despite everything, I missed you. Not Matthew, you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The real you." Martha felt as though she were standing at the edge of a precipice. One step could lead to devastating heartbreak or something wonderful beyond imagination. "I've missed you too," she admitted. "Every day." Catherine reached out slowly, giving Martha time to move away, and took her hand. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they'd done this 1,000 times. "Stay," Catherine said simply. "Help me make Golden Creek everything it could be." Martha looked down at their joined hands. Catherine's tanned and strong from ranch work, her own paler with ink-stained fingertips from marking schoolwork. Different, yet somehow perfectly matched. "What about the townspeople?" Martha asked, practical concerns intruding on the moment. "After everything that happened, they've moved on to fresher scandals," Catherine replied with a dismissive wave. "Mrs. Henderson was caught kissing the new blacksmith behind the church, and no one even remembers last year's Founders' Day dance." Her expression softened. "Besides, you've earned their respect as the school teacher who helped expose corruption. They're surprisingly forgiving when it suits them." Martha laughed softly. "And your father? He seems to know things he couldn't possibly." Catherine's cheeks colored. "He said something rather extraordinary to me last week. He told me that in his 63 years, he's learned that happiness comes in unexpected packages, and only fools refuse to unwrap them because they don't match expectations." She squeezed Martha's hand. "I think that was his way of giving his blessing." Martha felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "I never imagined this could be possible." "Neither did I," Catherine admitted. "But then, I never imagined a city woman in men's clothing would step off a stagecoach and turn my entire world upside down." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "I'm starting to think life's most wonderful adventures begin with a bit of chaos." Martha couldn't help herself. She reached up and brushed a strand of hair from Catherine's cheek, marveling at the freedom to do so. "I was so terrified that day, seeing you holding that sign. You were nothing like I expected." "Disappointed," Catherine teased. "Overwhelmed," Martha corrected. "You were so vibrant, so alive. I thought I'd never be able to maintain the charade because I couldn't stop staring at you." Catherine laughed, the sound filling the sunlit room. "And I thought you were the strangest man I'd ever encountered, so delicate and nervous and completely hopeless with practical matters." Her expression sobered slightly. "But you saw me, really saw me when most people only see a woman trying to do a man's job." "I still see you," Martha whispered. "I always will." Something shifted in Catherine's gaze, a decision made. She leaned forward slowly, giving Martha plenty of time to pull away. Instead, Martha closed the distance between them, pressing her lips gently against Catherine's. The kiss was brief, sweet, and carried the promise of 1,000 more to come. When they parted, both women were flushed and smiling. "Is that a yes to Father's proposition?" Catherine asked, her voice unsteady. Martha pretended to consider, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "The position does seem to offer unique advantages: excellent accommodations, proximity to my teaching position, fascinating colleagues." She smiled. "Though I may require certain additional terms." Catherine raised an eyebrow, playing along. "Such as?" "Daily riding lessons. I still fall off with alarming frequency." Martha stepped closer, emboldened. "Dinner companion duties. Someone to argue with about literature, the occasional dance partner when no one's watching." Catherine laughed, pulling Martha closer. "I believe those terms can be accommodated, Miss Wilson." Outside the window, a meadowlark began to sing, its clear notes carrying across the ranch. Below, ranch hands called to each other as they moved cattle from one pasture to another. Life at Golden Creek continued its steady rhythm, but within the sunlit room of the East Wing, something new and precious was just beginning. "Then, yes," Martha said. "My answer is yes." The afternoon sun dappled the path along Golden Creek with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Martha walked beside Catherine, their skirts occasionally brushing against wildflowers that lined the narrow trail. Neither had spoken since they'd left the house 10 minutes ago, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence, more expectant, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Martha snuck a glance at Catherine, admiring how the sunlight caught in her chestnut hair. A year ago, she would never have imagined herself here, strolling alongside this remarkable woman who had every reason to despise her. "I think this spot will do," Catherine announced, pausing where the creek widened into a small pool. A fallen log provided a natural bench, worn smooth by weather and previous visitors. Martha settled beside Catherine, smoothing her skirts and trying to calm her racing pulse. The sound of rushing water filled the space between them. "Father means well," Catherine began, trailing her fingers through a patch of long grass. "He's not typically so forward in his schemes, but his illness changed him. He says life's too short for hesitation." "It's a generous offer," Martha replied carefully, uncertain which direction this conversation might take. "Though I'd understand if you preferred I decline." Catherine's head snapped up, surprise evident in her expression. "Is that what you think I want?" Martha fiddled with a loose thread on her sleeve. "After everything that happened, the deception, the scandal, it would be perfectly reasonable." "Reasonable?" Catherine repeated, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I've never been accused of being particularly reasonable, Miss Wilson." She plucked a wildflower and twirled it between her fingers. "Do you know what I thought when Father proposed his arrangement?" Martha shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I thought, finally." Catherine's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I've been dropping hints for weeks, but he can be exasperatingly dense for such a clever man." Martha blinked rapidly. "You wanted this?" "I orchestrated it," Catherine admitted, her cheeks pinking slightly. "Though I'd appreciate if you didn't mention that part to Father. He prefers to believe brilliant ideas are his own." A laugh burst from Martha before she could contain it. "You arranged for your father to offer me a position?" "Well, I couldn't very well offer it myself, could I?" Catherine reasoned. "That would hardly be proper." The irony of discussing propriety given their circumstances wasn't lost on either of them, and they both dissolved into laughter. When their mirth subsided, Catherine's expression grew serious. "I've forgiven you, Martha. I did weeks ago." "Why?" Martha whispered, the question that had plagued her for months finally escaping. "How could you possibly forgive such deception?" Catherine considered the wildflower in her hand. "I was furious at first, humiliated, betrayed. But then I started sorting through memories, separating truth from fiction." She looked up, meeting Martha's gaze directly. "And I realized something rather astonishing. While Matthew was a fiction, the person who helped save our ranch, who stood up to Frank, who made Father laugh when nothing else could, that person was entirely real." Martha felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "I regret the deception, every day. But I can't regret coming to Golden Creek." She took a shaky breath. "It led me to you, to a purpose I never knew I wanted." The creek bubbled over stones, punctuating the silence that followed. "Could you be happy here?" Catherine asked suddenly, vulnerability evident in her voice. Not as Matthew, but as yourself? This isn't Boston. We don't have theaters or lectures or fancy shops. Just cattle, an endless sky, and people who think reading too many books is a peculiar habit. Martha smiled at the characterization. I thought I knew what would make me happy once. A comfortable teaching position, perhaps marriage to a kind but undemanding gentleman, a neat little house with roses. She gestured to the wilderness around them. This wasn't in my plans. Catherine's face fell slightly, and Martha hurried to continue. But I've discovered something rather profound in all this upheaval. Martha gathered her courage and reached for Catherine's hand. Home isn't about a place or a building. It's where your heart belongs. She squeezed Catherine's fingers gently. And my heart, it seems, belongs here. Catherine's eyes widened, hope blooming across her features. Truly? I'm happier calculating cattle yields and arguing with bankers on your behalf than I ever was teaching Boston's privileged children their letters, Martha confessed. Though I do enjoy working with the ranch children, too. Catherine's smile was radiant. They adore you. Little Emma Thompson told her mother she wants to be smart like Miss Wilson when she grows up. Martha felt a warm glow at the comment. Then my answer is yes to your father's proposition. Catherine's grip tightened on Martha's hand. That's wonderful news. Her voice turned playful. Though I should warn you, Mrs. Henderson is already speculating when you might marry the new blacksmith. She seems determined to see every unmarried woman in Golden Creek properly wed. Martha laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. Then Mrs. Henderson will be sorely disappointed. I have no interest in the blacksmith, handsome though he may be. No? Catherine's tone was casual, but her eyes told a different story. My affections, Martha said softly, lie elsewhere. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken sentiment. Catherine's gaze dropped to their joined hands, then back to Martha's face. We should return, Catherine said eventually, though she made no move to stand. Father will be wondering if I've scared you off with talk of quarterly cattle sales projections, Martha chuckled. On the contrary, I find quarterly projections rather thrilling. Catherine stood, pulling Martha up with her, keeping their hands linked a moment longer than necessary. You truly are the strangest woman I've ever met, Martha Wilson. I'll take that as a compliment, Martha replied, dusting off her skirt with her free hand. As they turned back toward the house, Catherine paused. Next month is Founder's Day. Martha stiffened involuntarily. The last Founder's Day celebration remained a vivid, painful memory. Her secret exposed, Catherine's tears, the hasty departure in disgrace. Catherine noticed her reaction. I thought perhaps we might attend, together, a chance to replace bad memories with better ones. Martha swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the gesture. I'd like that very much. They walked back side by side, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed, planning renovations and cattle purchases and a future neither had imagined possible just months before. The Golden Creek town square glowed with hundreds of lanterns strung between buildings and trees, casting warm light over the Founder's Day celebration. A small orchestra played from a wooden platform, while townspeople in their finest attire mingled around tables laden with pies, cakes, and punch bowls. Martha stood at the edge of the festivities, nervously adjusting the lavender satin ribbon at the waist of her new dress, a soft blue creation that Catherine had helped her select on their last trip to Cheyenne. The elegant simplicity suited Martha perfectly, though she still felt exposed after months of practical, high-necked teaching dresses. You look positively green, observed Josiah Hargrove, who sat in a wheeled chair beside her, looking distinguished in a dark suit. Buck up, girl. You faced down that Shark Phillips without flinching. Surely a country dance isn't more terrifying. Martha smiled weakly. Different kind of terror, Mr. Hargrove. Josiah, he corrected for the 10th time. You live under my roof, manage my finances, and have my daughter smiling again. I think we're well past formalities. Before Martha could respond, she spotted Catherine approaching through the crowd, carrying 3 cups of punch. Unlike Martha's nervous fidgeting, Catherine moved with easy confidence in a forest green dress that complemented her auburn hair and sun-kissed complexion. The Henderson twins have spiked the punch again, Catherine announced, handing them each a cup. Though they've shown remarkable restraint this year, it's actually drinkable. Bless those boys, Josiah declared, taking an appreciative sip. Tradition must be maintained. Martha tasted hers cautiously, then laughed. Definitely an improvement over last year's batch. I believe that one could have stripped paint. The casual reference to last year's disastrous events hung momentarily in the air, then dissipated as all three smiled. They'd come too far to let painful memories cast shadows on this evening. "Martha Wilson," called Eleanor Phillips, approaching with surprising warmth considering her husband was awaiting trial largely due to Martha's testimony. "How delightful to see you." She clasped Martha's hands. "The children can't stop talking about their lessons. Bobby actually opened a book voluntarily yesterday, a miracle I attribute entirely to your influence." "He's a bright boy," Martha replied, genuinely pleased. "His mind just needs the right challenge." Eleanor leaned closer. "Between us, my brother's coming to visit next month. Handsome widower, owns a profitable mercantile in Denver." She winked conspiratorially. "I thought perhaps a dinner." "Miss Wilson is unfortunately occupied with ranch business that entire month," Catherine interrupted smoothly, materializing at Martha's side. "Perhaps another time." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Such dedication to your employer. Well, the offer stands." She patted Martha's arm and disappeared into the crowd. "Ranch business," Martha murmured, eyebrow raised. "Very important ranch business," Catherine confirmed solemnly, though her eyes danced with mischief. "Involving extensive research into cattle breeding ledgers. Absolutely cannot be postponed." Josiah snorted into his punch. "You two are impossible." He glanced past them and brightened. "Ah, there's Judge Morris. I need a word about that water rights business." He thrust his empty cup at Catherine. "Don't hover over Martha all evening, Kitty. The poor woman deserves to enjoy herself." As Josiah wheeled away, Martha felt a fresh wave of anxiety. "Everyone's staring," she whispered to Catherine. "They're admiring your dress," Catherine replied. "You look beautiful." Martha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm still the woman who masqueraded as a man. They haven't forgotten." "No, they haven't," Catherine agreed pragmatically. "But Golden Creek has weathered bank fraud, drought, and Mr. Peterson's attempt to introduce ostrich farming. Your scandal is merely one of many colorful chapters in local history." As if to prove her point, Sheriff Daniels approached, tipping his hat respectfully. "Evening, ladies. Ms. Wilson, that financial report you helped prepare for the trial was mighty impressive. Judge says he's never seen such thorough evidence." "Thank you, Sheriff," Martha replied, genuinely surprised by the compliment. "You ought to teach a course on bookkeeping," he continued. "Might help some of these ranchers avoid getting swindled again." After he moved on, Martha turned to Catherine with wide eyes. "Did that actually happen?" "I told you," Catherine said triumphantly. "You're the school teacher who helped expose corruption and saved several local businesses from ruin. Far more interesting than being the woman who once wore trousers." Throughout the evening, Martha found herself welcomed with similar warmth by townspeople who had once whispered behind their hands at the sight of her. Mrs. Thompson asked her opinion on her daughter's education. Mr. Whitaker from the general store discussed ordering books for her students. Even Frank Thomas's replacement as foreman sought her advice on tracking cattle expenses. "You see," Catherine murmured as they sampled Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning apple pie. "Not so terrifying after all." The orchestra struck up a lively waltz, and couples began moving toward the dance floor, a wooden platform constructed specifically for the occasion. "Oh no," Martha said, taking an instinctive step backward. "I can't possibly." "Can't or won't?" Catherine challenged gently. "Both," Martha insisted. "I haven't danced since—" She stopped, memories of that horrible night flooding back. Catherine set down her plate with decisive movements. "Precisely why we must." She held out her hand. "Trust me?" Martha stared at the outstretched hand, remembering all the times in the past year when Catherine had extended similar trust to her, with the ranch accounts, with teaching the local children, with her father's health. "Always," Martha answered, placing her hand in Catherine's. They moved onto the dance floor just as the orchestra transitioned to a slower waltz. Several heads turned, but Martha barely noticed, focused entirely on Catherine's reassuring presence. "I should warn you," Martha whispered as they took position. "I'm still a dreadful dancer. I've worn sturdy boots in anticipation of that fact." Catherine replied, eyes twinkling. Then, leaning closer, she added, I don't care who leads, Martha, as long as we're together. With those words, they began to move, Catherine guiding subtly at first, then allowing Martha to find her confidence. They weren't the most graceful couple on the floor. Martha still counted steps under her breath, and once nearly collided with the minister and his wife. But the joy between them was palpable. As they circled beneath the golden glow of lanterns, surrounded by a community that had somehow remarkably embraced them, Martha caught Josiah's approving nod from the sidelines. The old man raised his punch cup in a subtle toast. A penny for your thoughts, Catherine said, drawing Martha's attention back. Martha smiled, feeling a profound sense of belonging wash over her. I was just thinking that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with desperate decisions. Catherine's eyebrow arched. And end. Martha looked into the eyes of the woman who had become her entire world and finished the thought. An end exactly where you're meant to be. In that moment, with Catherine in her arms and Golden Creek's lanterns reflecting like stars above them, Martha Wilson finally understood the true meaning of coming home. Epilogue. Golden Creek, 5 years later. Martha Wilson brushed chalk dust from her hands and stepped back to admire her handiwork on the blackboard. The arithmetic problems she'd prepared would challenge her older students without discouraging the younger ones. A perfect balance, just like everything else at Golden Creek these days. Miss Wilson! 8-year-old Eliza Thompson burst through the schoolhouse door, her braids flying and bonnet dangling forgotten around her neck. The new calves are here, twin boys. Miss Catherine says you simply must come see them right away. Martha glanced at the clock. 15 minutes until her students would arrive for the day. Did she use those exact words, Eliza? Simply must? Eliza's freckled face scrunched in concentration. Well, she said, tell that bookkeeper of mine if she doesn't come witness this triumph immediately, I'll name both calves after her most detested arithmetic problems. Martha laughed. That sounded precisely like Catherine. In that case, I'd better hurry. We can't have calves named compound interest and depreciation roaming our pastures, can we? She grabbed her shawl. The morning still carried a chill, even in late April, and followed Eliza's skipping form across the ranch yard toward the birthing barn. 5 years had transformed Golden Creek Ranch from a struggling operation on the brink of foreclosure into the showpiece of Wyoming territory. New outbuildings gleamed with fresh paint, fences stood straight and sturdy, and cattle, so many more than before, grazed contentedly in lush pastures that stretched to the horizon. The schoolhouse itself stood as testament to their success, a proper building with glass windows, not the converted storage room where Martha had first taught the ranch children. 20 students now attended daily, from both Golden Creek and neighboring ranches, their eager minds the most rewarding investment Martha had ever made. Hurry, Eliza called, already yards ahead. Martha quickened her pace, lifting her skirts to navigate around a puddle from yesterday's brief shower. As she approached the birthing barn, she heard Catherine's distinctive laugh, a rich, melodious sound that never failed to warm Martha from the inside out. There you are, Catherine called when Martha appeared in the doorway. She stood in the straw-covered stall, hair escaping its practical braid, sleeves rolled to her elbows, an expression triumphant. Beside her lay a magnificent reddish-brown cow, looking exhausted but content with 2 wobbly-legged calves nuzzling against her. Aren't they magnificent? Catherine gestured proudly. First successful twins from our new breeding program. Strong lungs, perfect markings, and look, they're already standing. Martha moved closer, smiling at Catherine's evident delight. At 32, Catherine Hargrove had established herself as the territory's most innovative cattle breeder. Men, who had once scoffed at taking instruction from a woman, now traveled for days to consult with her on bloodlines and breeding techniques. They're beautiful, Martha agreed, genuinely impressed. The calves were uncommonly sturdy, with the distinctive coloring Catherine had been selectively breeding for 3 seasons. Your father would be bursting with pride. A fleeting shadow crossed Catherine's face at the mention of Josiah, who had passed peacefully 2 winters ago, but it quickly gave way to a smile. He'd say it was about time those fancy theories proved themselves useful, and then demand we name one after him, Martha added, making Catherine laugh again. Miss Catherine? Eliza piped up from where she'd been watching the calves with rapt attention. May I tell the others when school starts? Billy Jackson said girls don't know anything about cattle breeding and I want to prove him wrong. Catherine exchanged an amused glance with Martha. You absolutely may, Eliza, and you can tell Master Jackson that I expect a full retraction of his statement, preferably in writing. Eliza beamed, clearly envisioning Billy's mortification. Yes, ma'am. She dashed away, presumably to prepare her victory speech before school commenced. When she'd gone, Catherine stepped out of the stall and closed the gate behind her. She reminds me of myself at that age, constantly having to prove herself. Let's hope her path is somewhat easier, Martha replied, brushing a piece of straw from Catherine's shoulder. Her hand lingered a moment longer than necessary, a private gesture of affection. Will you join us for lunch today? The children have prepared presentations on local wildlife. I wouldn't miss it, Catherine promised. Though I should warn you, Mr. Pembroke from the Cattlemen's Association is visiting this afternoon. He's finally considering our proposal for the breeding registry. Martha raised an eyebrow. After 3 years of rejection letters? What changed his mind? Catherine's eyes sparkled mischievously. Apparently his prize bull died last month, and suddenly our breeding stock looks remarkably appealing. How fortunate, Martha replied dryly. I'll prepare the contracts. Already assuming he'll agree? That's my confident Martha. Catherine glanced around to ensure they were alone, then quickly squeezed Martha's hand. 5 minutes of victory celebration, then back to work? Martha nodded, following Catherine to her small office adjacent to the barn. The room reflected Catherine's practical nature. Functional desks, sturdy chairs, and walls covered with meticulously labeled diagrams of bloodlines and breeding schedules. The sole decorative touch was a framed sketch Martha had commissioned of the original Golden Creek ranch house as it had appeared when she first arrived. Catherine closed the door and immediately wrapped Martha in a proper embrace, one that would have raised eyebrows had anyone witnessed it between two women. 5 years, she murmured against Martha's hair. Sometimes I still can't believe how far we've come. Martha relaxed into the embrace, savoring the familiar scent of Catherine's soap, mingled with the earthy fragrances of the ranch. From near bankruptcy to the most prosperous operation in 3 counties, it's remarkable. I wasn't talking about the ranch, Catherine replied softly, pulling back to meet Martha's gaze. Martha's heart swelled. 5 years of shared meals, private conversations by the fireplace, and subtle touches that communicated what words couldn't safely express in their world. 5 years of building something precious and unexpected. I know, Martha whispered. A knock at the door had them separating with practiced ease, resuming the appropriate distance of business partners well before Catherine called, "Enter!" Thomas, their foreman of 4 years, poked his head in. Pardon the interruption, Miss Hargrove, Miss Wilson. Telegram just arrived from Cheyenne. He extended a yellow envelope. Catherine took it with a nod of thanks. When they were alone again, she broke the seal and scanned the contents, her expression brightening. The bank approved our loan for the North Pasture expansion. Martha couldn't help but smile at Catherine's enthusiasm. Was there ever any doubt? Golden Creek's credit is impeccable these days. Thanks to you, Catherine pointed out. Your financial management is the foundation of everything we've accomplished. Partnership, Martha corrected gently. Your vision, my organization. The word partnership carried layers of meaning between them, their public business arrangement and their private devotion. The distant ringing of the school bell interrupted their moment. Your students await, Catherine said, reluctantly stepping back. Lunch at noon? Martha nodded, adjusting her collar and smoothing her hair. Don't forget your presentation copy for Mr. Pembroke. I left it on your desk last night. Already in my satchel, Catherine assured her, along with the 3 backup arguments you prepared for his inevitable objections. Martha smiled, prepared to leave, then paused at the door. Catherine? I'm happy, Martha said simply, the declaration both ordinary and profound. Catherine's expression softened. So am I. The words didn't need elaboration. Both women understood the improbability of their happiness, the extraordinary circumstances that had led Martha Wilson, once a desperate woman masquerading as her dead brother, to find everything she never knew she wanted on a struggling Wyoming ranch. Martha made her way back to the schoolhouse, greeting her arriving students with genuine warmth. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows as the children settled at their desks, chattering excitedly about Catherine's new calves. news that had apparently spread faster than Eliza's legs could carry her. "Settle down, everyone," Martha called, tapping her pointer against the desk. "Before we discuss Golden Creek's newest residents, let's begin with our history lesson. Who can tell me about the founding of Wyoming Territory?" Several hands shot up, and Martha called on shy Timothy Harper, who rarely volunteered. "It became a territory in 1868, he said carefully, and was the first to give women the right to vote." "Excellent, Timothy," Martha beamed, thinking how fitting it was that they'd built their unconventional life in this progressive corner of the world. And why was that significant? As the lesson continued, Martha glanced out the window to see Catherine striding purposefully across the yard, her confident gait unmistakable even at a distance. She was directing 2 ranch hands regarding the new fence line, gesturing with the natural authority she'd possessed since Martha first met her. For a moment, Martha was transported back to that terrifying day when she'd stepped off the stagecoach in men's clothing, certain her deception would be discovered instantly. Instead, she'd found Catherine Hargrove holding a sign with her brother's name, changing the course of her life forever. "Miss Wilson," Eliza's voice pulled Martha from her reverie. "Is something wrong? You're smiling at nothing." Martha turned back to her curious students. "Not at all, Eliza. I was just thinking about journeys." "Like explorers?" asked Billy Jackson, suddenly interested. "Something like that," Martha replied. "Sometimes the most important journeys aren't about where you're going, but who you become along the way." The children looked mildly confused by this philosophical turn, but Martha didn't mind. They were young yet, with their own journeys ahead of them. They couldn't possibly understand how a desperate decision, born of grief and necessity, could lead to such profound belonging. After school that day, Martha would record the bank's approval in the ranch ledgers. She would review contracts for Mr. Pembroke and prepare figures for their upcoming cattle sale. Later, she and Catherine would dine with the visiting banker and his wife, maintaining their careful public personas as dedicated business partners. But after their guests departed, they would sit together on the porch of the home they'd built, watching the sunset paint Golden Creek's pastures in shades of amber and gold. Their shoulders would touch, just slightly, as they discussed the day's events and planned tomorrow's tasks. And in that quiet moment, one of thousands they'd shared, they would acknowledge without words the family they'd created, founded not on convention, but on trust, forgiveness, and enduring love. It wasn't the life Martha Wilson had imagined for herself. It was infinitely better.